This is a story from long ago, told to me when I was very young by an old man who, when he was young, was told the same story by a very old man to whom Rose Red was great-grandmother. Rose Red's mother was a poor widow who lived in a lonely cottage. In front of the cottage was a garden, and either side of the front door stood 2 rose trees, one of which bore white and the other red roses. They were old and gnarly, but heavy with flowers in season. She had 2 kids who reminded her of the rose trees, and one was called Snow White and the other Rose Red. They were as good and happy, busy and cheerful as 2 children in the world ever were. Only Snow White was quieter and more gentle than Rose Red. Rose Red liked nothing better than to run about in the meadows and the fields, picking flowers and catching butterflies. But Snow White sat at home with her mother and helped her with the housework, or read to her when there was nothing to do. The 2 children were so fond of each other that they always held hands when they went out together. And when Snow White said, "We'll not leave each other," Rose Red would answer, "Never, as long as we live." And their mother would add, "You can always achieve more together than you can alone." They often ran about the forest, the 2 of them together, and gathered fruit, and no animals ever did them any harm, but actually trusted them and were tame enough to come close. The little hare would eat cabbage out of their hands, the roe deer grazed by their side, the stag cavorted around them, and the birds relaxed in the trees and sang whatever they knew. They were so at home outdoors that, if they stayed too late out in the forest and night came on, they'd just lay themselves down near one another on the moss and sleep until morning came, and their mother knew this and didn't worry on their account. Snow White and Rose Red kept their mother's little cottage so neat that it was a pleasure to visit. In the summer, Rose Red took care of the house and every morning put fresh flowers by her mum's bed before she woke up, including a rose from each tree. In the winter, Snow White lit the fire and hung the kettle on the hob. The kettle was brass and it shone like gold, it was polished so brightly. In the evening, when snow fell, the mother would say, "Snow White, go and bolt the door," and then they'd sit round the hearth, and the mother would put on her glasses and read aloud out of a large book, and the 2 girls listened as they sat and spun. And close by them lay the pet lamb on the floor, and behind them, on a perch, sat a white dove with its head hidden beneath its wings. One evening, as they were sitting comfortably like this together, someone knocked at the door as if he wanted to be let in. The mother said, "Quick, Rose Red, open the door. It must be a traveller seeking shelter from the weather." Rose Red went and pushed back the bolt, thinking that it was a poor man, but it wasn't. It was a bear that stretched its broad black head through the door. Rose Red screamed and jumped back. The lamb bleated, the dove fluttered, and Snow White hid herself behind her mother's bed. But the bear began to speak and said, "Don't be afraid. I mean you no harm. I'm half frozen, and I only want to warm myself beside you for a while." "Poor bear," said the mother. "Come on in and lie down by the fire. Make sure you don't burn your coat." Then she cried, "Snow White, Rose Red, come out. The bear will do you no harm. He means well." So they both came out, and by the lamb and the dove came nearer and weren't afraid of him. The bear said, "Here kids, knock the snow out of my coat a little." So they brought a broom and swept the bear's hide clean, and he stretched himself by the fire and growled contentedly and comfortably. It wasn't long before they all grew quite at home together and played tricks with their clumsy guest. They tugged his hair with their hands, put their feet on his back and rolled him about, or they took a hazel switch and beat him, and when he growled they just laughed. But the bear took it all in good part, only when they were too rough he called out, "Leave me alive, children! Snow White, Rose Red, would you beat your mate to death?" When it was bedtime, and the others went to bed, the mother said to the bear, "You can lie here by the hearth, and then you'll be safe from the cold and the bad weather." As soon as day dawned, the two children let him out, and he trotted across the snow into the forest. After that, the bear came every evening at the same time, laid himself down by the hearth, let the children amuse themselves with him as much as they liked, and they got so used to him that the doors were never fastened until their big furry friend had arrived. When spring came, and all outside was green, the bear said one morning to Snow White, "I've got to be off now, and I can't come back for the whole summer." "Where are you going then, my mate?" asked Snow White. "I have to go into the forest and guard my treasures from the wicked forest dwarfs. In the winter, when the earth's frozen and hard, they have to stay on the ground and they can't get out. But now, when the sun's warmed and thawed the earth, they break through it and come out to pry into your business and steal your stuff. And what once gets into their hands and in their caves doesn't easily see daylight again. They're light-fingered, bad-tempered and rude, and if you get too close you've a week with flowers up your snitch before you can face a regular forest smell again." Snow White was quite sorry at his departure, and as she unbolted the door for him, and the bear was hurrying out, he caught against the bolt, and a piece of his hairy coat was torn off, and it seemed to Snow White as if she'd seen a bit of gold shining through it, but she wasn't sure about that. The bear ran away quickly and was soon out of sight behind the trees. A short time afterwards, the mother sent her children into the forest to get firewood. And there they found a big tree which lay felled on the ground, and close by the trunk something was jumping backwards and forwards in the grass, but they couldn't quite make out what it was. When they came nearer, they saw a forest dwarf with an old withered face and a snow white beard a metre long. The end of the beard was caught in a crevice of the tree, and the little fellow was jumping about like a dog tied to a rope and didn't know what to do. He glared at the girls with his fiery red eyes and cried,
"What are you doing standing there? Come over here and help me."
"What are you up to, little man?" asked Rose Red.
"Mind your own god business,"
answered the dwarf.
"I was going to split the tree to get a little wood for cooking. The little bit of food that we people get's immediately burnt up with heavy logs. We don't swallow so much as you big greedy folk. I'd just driven the wedge safely in, everything going according to plan. The flaming wedge was too smooth and it suddenly shot out, and the tree closed so quickly I couldn't pull my beautiful white beard out. So now it's tight and I can't get away, and you silly, sleek, cream-faced spoons, laugh. There's words for people like you that gentlemen like me don't use."
The children tried very hard, but they couldn't pull the beard out. It was caught too fast. "I'll run and fetch someone," said Rose Red.
"You garmless worm,"
snarled the dwarf.
"why do you want to fetch someone? There's already too many of you for me. Can't you think of something better?"
"Don't be impatient," said Snow White. "I'll help you." And she pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of the beard. As soon as the dwarf felt himself free, he laid hold of a bag which lay amongst the roots of the tree and which was full of gold, and lifted it up, grumbling to himself.
"You 3-foot fools, cut off a piece of my fine beard. You give me wind just looking at you."
and then he swung the bag up on his back and went off without even once looking at the children. Not thanks, ta-ra, or anything. Some time afterwards, Snow White and Rose Red went to catch a fish for tea. As they came near the brook, they saw something like a large grasshopper jumping towards the water as if it was going to leap in. They ran to it and found it was the forest dwarf. "Where are you going?" said Rose Red. "You surely don't want to go into the water."
Am I dressed for swimming, you mislaid prune?
cried the dwarf.
Don't you see that a great stinking fish wants to pull me in?
The little man had been sitting there fishing, and unluckily the wind had tangled up his beard with the fishing line. A moment later, a big fish made a bite, and the feeble creature had not the strength to pull it out. The fish kept the upper hand and pulled the dwarf towards him. He held on to all the reeds and rushes, but it wasn't much good, for he was forced to follow the movements of the fish, and he was in urgent danger of being dragged into the water. The girls came just in time. They held him fast and tried to free his beard from the line, but all in vain. Beard and line were all tangled up together. There was nothing for it but to bring out the scissors and cut the beard again, whereby another small part of it was lost. When the dwarf saw that, he screamed out,
How rude is that, you parcel full of doziness, to disfigure a man's face? Wasn't it enough to clip off the end of my beard? Now you've cut off the best part of it. I won't be able to show my face back home. I wish you'd been lost in quicksand before you got here.
Then he took out a sack of pearls which lay in the rushes, and without another word, he dragged it away and disappeared behind a stone. Not that long after, the mother sent the two children to the town to buy needles and thread and laces and ribbons. The road led them across a heath, upon which huge pieces of rock lay strewn about. There, they noticed a large bird hovering in the air, flying slowly round and round above them. It sank lower and lower, and at last it settled on a rock not very far away. Immediately, they heard a loud and piteous cry. They ran up and saw with horror that the eagle had seized their old acquaintance, the forest dwarf, and was going to carry him off. The children, full of pity, at once took tight hold of the little man and pulled against the eagle so long that at last it let its booty go. As soon as the dwarf had recovered from his first fright, he cried with his shrill voice,
Could you not have done that more carefully? You've dragged at my brown coat so that it's all torn and full of holes, and the buttons have popped off my trousers, you clumsy clod-hopping nose breathers.
Then he took up a sack full of precious stones with one hand, and holding his pants up with the other, he slipped away under the rock again into his hole. The girls, who by this time were used to his ingratitude, went on their way and did their business in town. As they crossed the heath again on their way home, they surprised the dwarf, who'd emptied out his bag of precious stones in a clean spot and had not thought that anyone would come past there so late. The evening sun shone upon the brilliant stones. They glittered and sparkled with all the colours of the rainbow, so beautifully that the children just stood still and stared at them.
What are you staring at, you pigeon-brained waste of space?
Cried the dwarf, and his ashen grey face grew copper red with rage. He was still cursing when a loud growling was heard, and a black bear came trotting towards them out of the forest. The dwarf sprang up in a fright, but he couldn't reach his cave because because the bear was already too close. Then, full of dread, and in fear of his life, he cried,
"Spare me, Mr. Bear. I'll give you all my treasures. Look, the beautiful jewels lying there. Don't take my life. I've got kids, you know."
Listener, he didn't, but he still had wits enough to lie.
"What do you want with someone as little as me? You wouldn't even feel me between your teeth. Take these two daft girls. They're tender morsels for you. You'll get 2 dinners off them and enough left for sandwiches."
The bear took no notice of his words, but gave the wicked creature a single blow with his paw, which was enough to quieten him down, and that was the end of him. The girls had run away, but the bear called out to them, "Snow White, Rose Red, don't be afraid. Wait, I'll come with you." Then they recognised the voice and waited, and when he came up to them, suddenly his bare skin fell off, and he stood there, a handsome man, clothed all in gold. "I'm a king's son," he said, "and I was bewitched by that wicked forest dwarf who'd stolen my treasures. I've had to run about the forest as a savage bear for ages now, but now he's dead, I'm free at last, and he's got his well-deserved punishment." Eventually, Snow White married him, and Rose Red married his brother, and they divided between them the great treasure that the dwarf had gathered together in his cave. The old mother lived peacefully and happily with her children for many years. She took the 2 rose trees with her to the palace garden and could see them from her window. And every year they bore the most beautiful roses, white and red, and reminded her of the happy times in her old